Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Ishvaro Guratmeti Murti Veda Vivagine Vyomavadyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Sarva Vedanta Siddhanta Gocharam Tamagocharam Govindam Paramanandam Sadgurum Pranatosmyaham Om Sri Krishna Govinda Narayana. So I just explained to you that this page 38 and page 39, it basically outlines chapter 7 of the Gita, which explains creation. It's very scientific, it's very technical, but it explains how creation works in detail. And I don't want to go through the whole thing now. I just did go through it. I encapsulated the essence of the argument. And the argument is that Maya adds matter to the creation, and matter doesn't have any value, and the self doesn't have any value. When you put the two together, then what? Then the self becomes valuable. In other words, the self becomes the value. Because why? Because matter depends upon spirit. Your body and your emotions and your mind depend upon your consciousness. So your consciousness is king. Understand? But consciousness doesn't depend upon your body and mind and your intellect. That's all. It's simple. But when you're ignorant, Maya's operating and you're ignorant, you think that consciousness depends upon matter, don't you? You think that if your body dies, your consciousness dies.
Yeah.
Don't you? You think chemistry is destiny. Chemistry is not destiny. That's a materialist point of view. And that you look at their story about the Big Bang, about the creation. Look at their story. What is it? First is all this matter comes, and then, then out of the gaseous Precambrian ooze, whatever it is, the ocean of gases and this and that and the other thing, then the first little conscious being, like peeks his little eye, comes out of the world, looks around in consciousness, and what? And then consciousness is present. Comes after, Well, you can't get consciousness out of something that doesn't have consciousness in it. Understand? So there's a certain kind of truth to it, though, because when Maya creates, Jesus, I'm getting into technical stuff here, and I want to kind of stay away from that. But read these two verses. But anyway, when consciousness, when Maya creates consciousness, oh Lord, no, we're not going down that. No, we're not going down that rat hole. Okay, thank you, Lord, for stopping my mind. You can't get something out of nothing, and you can't get consciousness or value out of matter. You have to add value to matter, and you do that by your conditioning. And you think your body's valuable for various reasons, but you're the valuable principle. Yes. So you're free of your body. 4 types of devotees: hate the sin, not the sinner. We don't need to deal with that one. Okay, 10. When your devotion is one-pointed, now actually we have to back up a bit. Krishna says there's 4 types of people, 4 types of devotees. He says the people who seek, who are devoted to God because they're suffering. And then there's the people who want something. They're suffering too, but they're not suffering, they just want more. And so that's called spiritual materialism. Kat's a spiritual materialist. She's not suffering, she's got it made. She's a beautiful, classy, intelligent, sexy woman, and she's working the world really nicely. But she's greedy, and she wants more. So she believes in this spiritual materialist principle, the secret principle. She's going to add a little more with her clever mantra tricks or whatever it is, however it is. She's going to extract more. That's called spiritual materialism. And the Vedas, the Karma Kanda of the Vedas, the 3 basic texts, the initial portion of all 4 Vedas is the spiritual materialism. Trungpa wrote a great book called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. Because most, smart people use spiritual knowledge to get stuff from the world. Fair enough. Why not? If you want stuff from this world, money, sex, power, why not use spiritual knowledge? It helps. It can. But the Vedantas at the end of each one of those Vedas is not spiritual materialism. It's what cuts through spiritual materialism. It says, hey, that's the wrong reason to use your spirituality. You should use your spirituality to set yourself free of material. But so most of spirituality is for materialists. The problem is that when you're pursuing spirituality for material reasons, you discover after a while that you're still not happy. You have to just keep doing stuff. So, and so you get, let's say, seeking fatigue. You get fatigued, you get tired of seeking. And then you realize I'm looking in the wrong place for the happiness. The material world is not the place, the material, psychological, emotional world is not the place where I'm going to find happiness. I get little bits of it here and there, but it's always, that happiness is always like tinged by sorrow. And I want a way out of the whole thing altogether. And then you become interested in Vedanta. Because Vedanta takes you right out of the whole spiritual and material world. It's what's beyond spirit and matter. Because spirit and matter are categories. So and then he says the third kind of person is the kind of person who wants to know who I am. Those are inquirers. And the fourth kind of devotee is what? Is the non-dual bhakta. That's a person who what? Is satisfied in themselves alone, and who's no conditional or no conditions or duality in their love. And they're completely self-satisfied people. Well, this verse is talking about this verse 10 is talking about the seeking. This is the third stage. And he's talking about the jnana yogis, the people who are seeking for knowledge of Ishwar, knowledge of God. Once you get knowledge of God, then you become a non-dual devotee. Then you go from step 4 to step 5. So the first people are basically tamasic people, who are suffering people. Then the rajasic people, who are enjoying people, using God to get somewhere. The third people are people who want to know God. That's their seekers of truth. And the fourth group of people are non-dual bhaktas, non-dual devotees. And they're established, they're what? They love of self as the self. In other words, see that in that fifth stage? That's the final stage. They love the self as the self, not as a jiva. And if there is a jiva there, then it's their jiva loves the self as the self. So everything's resolved and taken care of there, and there's no more seeking. and there's no more, and there's total indifference to all these objects. That's the progress. That's the progression. Here, there's it's just 5 stages.
They actualize the knowledge.
Yeah, that's right. They've done their nididhyasana, they've actualized the knowledge. Yeah. And insofar as there is a jiva, and there is a jiva, because you call him a devotee, that devotee is totally satisfied with himself, warts and all. Warts and all. In the Bhagavad Gita, after Krishna's taught Arjuna Karma Yoga, then Krishna, starting with chapter 7, teaches Jnana Yoga, teaches Ishwar. Because now Arjuna's understood what Karma Yoga is, he wants to know what Ishwara is. Because Jiva is understood what a Jiva needs to do. Now what's Ishwara? Because these are the 2 equations. Me, the Jiva, and 2, Ishwara, the creator, God, the world. What's Ishwara? So, Krishna explains to him Ishwara. There's a good explanation. He presents it as a higher self and a lower self. The higher nature and the lower nature, it's called. In there. Para-prakriti and prakriti, it's called. It's technical terms. Then Arjuna's getting more and more curious. He's liking this. So he says to Krishna, Arjuna says to Krishna, he says, okay, Lord, he said, how do I recognize you in this world? He's getting curious. He said, okay. He said, every object, his spirit and matter, is a material lower self and a higher self. How do I see the higher self in the world? And Krishna gives him a list. He said, I'll give you a short list, but actually it's like 4 pages. It's a long list, and he claims it's a short list. But basically he says, wherever there's anything exceptional, that's me. He says, among the beasts of prey, I am the lion. Among the mountains, I'm the mighty Himalayas. Among the birds, I'm the eagle. Among the trees, I'm the this. The most impressive thing. I love the word. I love hummingbirds. If you think about hummingbirds, and you understand the behavior of hummingbirds, there's no way you can't think about God. There's no way you can include God, not include God in the equation. They are the most amazing, or water bears. Huh? You know water bears? Google them. It immediately, they're so extraordinary, they're so incredible that what? The only thing you can think of, where did this come from? Who created this? What created this? This is the most extraordinary thing. So he lists a whole bunch of extraordinary things. Most of the definitions are references to things that Indians would have known like 2,300 years ago. So they all need to be translated, and it's a bother, but it doesn't matter because, when in a sunset, every day there's a sunset, but or a sunrise. Yesterday I took a picture of a sunrise in the morning with that rainbow. It was, I took about 20 pictures. I got it down to the 2 best ones, and I sent it to a bunch of people. Everybody's like, what? Where are you? But it was the most extraordinary thing. It was so beautiful. It was there was a beauty that was way beyond an ordinary sunset. It was so powerful. So that's why people love nature, because they see things that remind them of God, isn't it? The nature lovers, actually, that's their form of worship. They're worshiping God by what? Immersing themselves in nature. So these are all wonderful, beautiful things. And then Arjuna, he's getting really curious. He said, you say this is just a small fraction of it. You say this is just a short list of your glories, and I definitely believe that. I definitely accept that. Why don't you show me the whole thing? Big mistake. And Krishna says, well, no one's ever seen it before, and but since you're my friend and you asked me, I'll show you. But you need a special eye for it. You need a third eye. What's the third eye? Scripture. Anyway, you need a third eye. And I'm going to open your third eye because no one's ever seen this before. And you're going to get to see all of it as it is. And so Arjuna, wow, hit the jackpot. Cool. Super cool. Okay, let's go. So Ishvara opens his third eye, and Ishvara appears as this amazing, radiant, incredibly divine being. Just glorious, bejeweled, and just full of light and radiance, and just unbelievably awesome. Just like way beyond anything you could imagine, like your first acid trip. My first acid trip was like that. You gotta be kidding. This was going on all the time inside me, and I never saw this? God, it was like, you gotta be kidding. I was like so awed, overjoyed. I was so lifted up by that experience. It was unbelievable. And so he's just like totally, oh, this is incredible. And then what happens? Slowly, the whole thing turns dark and ugly and evil. And this great radiant fire of destructive fire comes. And Ishvara is like a incredibly wrathful deity. And he opens his mouth wide, and Arjuna looks in his mouth, and he sees the whole world in his mouth, the whole battle of Kurukshetra, and all the warriors, and he sees them all. He sees Krishna chewing them all and eating them, and he sees Duryodhana and Karna and stuck in his teeth, screaming, and Krishna grinding them up and just licking his chops with the greatest relish as he destroys everything. He says the whole planets in the solar system all consumed in this great conflagration of fire, and everything screaming in pain and suffering and sorrow. And Arjuna just freaks out. He's just like, oh. And he begs Krishna to take the vision away. He said, oh, please, please. He says, return to your original self. I want my friend back. I don't want to see this. And he doesn't pass the test. What's the test? Yeah, he can't love the ugly bits of himself. His love is what? Conditional. Understand? And these people, they love the ugly bits of themselves as much as they love the good bits. They're not trying to change the ugly bits into good bits. They're not afraid of the ugliness that's in them. They're not trying to become perfect as jivas. That's what we're trying to do, isn't it? We're trying to redeem ourselves as jivas, our limited, suffering, sinful selves, by becoming good people. We're trying to justify ourselves by making ourselves different from what we are. But you can't be different from what you are. Maya is Maya, and the self is the self, and you can't, and Maya is not real, so you can't change something that's not real, and the self is real, and they can't change something about the self. You can't change the self because it is real. So you can't change what isn't real, and you can't change what is real. All you can do is understand it and accept it. So you've got to give up on trying to make yourself better or different or pure or perfect or holy or spiritual or whatever. Otherwise, you're just stuck in this rut again. You're just stuck in duality. You're always trying to fix something. There's nothing wrong with anything. There never was. It's all beautiful. And until you can see the beauty in the ugliness, you're not free. That's what non-dual means. Instead, you can see it and appreciate it and love it for what it is. In Zen, they have this notion, it's called wabi-sabi. I saw the book, there's a book somewhere in some bookstore recently called wabi-sabi. What was that? I don't remember. No. Wabi-sabi is a Japanese Zen term that expresses this idea. And what it means, wabi means, you have ever been to Kyoto or Japan and seen those zendos, where the temples where they have the gardens with the rock gardens and the beautiful trees and so forth, and the pebbles. Maybe you haven't, but they have these beautiful rocks. And those rocks, they won't put a rock in there unless it has wabi. Wabi means it's a perfect rock. And a rock that has wabi, no rock is perfect. But this is just part of the tradition. So you can spend $500,000 for a rock that has wabi. Yeah, that's a perfect rock. So that represents what? The self, consciousness, yourself. That's perfect. And then sabe means what? What's imperfect? What's imperfect? What changes? The lower self. So the garden is imperfect. It always changes, but the rock is what? The symbol of the self, which doesn't change. So this in this changing garden, with the colors and the trees and the forms and the shapes and the water, all the elements are included in those gardens. You find this eternal principle that doesn't change. It's just a symbol of this whole teaching. It's a beautiful metaphor for reality. And wabi-sabi means what? When you understand that what's imperfect is perfect. You're no longer separating, in other words, what's perfect from imperfect, and trying to what? Achieve imperfection. You already are perfect. And what's imperfect is perfect too. Understand? Why? Because it brings you to the knowledge of what? Of who you are. And because it's not real anyway. You're never really suffering when you're suffering. You're always what? Observing your suffering. And that if you're observing an object, you're not the object. And when you realize that, so what? So the body's suffering. Big deal. So what? I'm not suffering. You, awareness, are not in any way impacted by what happens to you. Understand? If there was any connection, even the slightest connection between the self and the world, if there's even the slightest connection, there would be no freedom possible. There is no connection. Why? Why would there be no freedom possible? Because the self would change the world, and the world would change the self, wouldn't it? Because they'd be connected. What would the self do? The self would make the world eternal, wouldn't it? Would make it unchanging. In other words, the quality or the property of the self, which is lack of change, would be what? Projected on the changing world, and there'd be no change. Then what? Would you have a world? You wouldn't have a world. And you don't have a world when everything's non-dual, do you? There's no world. Consciousness is prior to the world. So, and if the world had an impact on the self, then what? There's no freedom, because the world is changing, and then the self would change, wouldn't it? Because the world was affecting the self. So then you'd have, So then you'd either have a mess where nothing changes or where everything changes, and then you don't have life at all, do you? Life is these two principles. An ever-changing principle that includes what? Good and evil. They're just it's a duality. And there's no, and what? The flow of time just changes one thing into another. Look at the yin and the yang symbol. It's a beautiful symbol. You know that in the white yang, there's a black dot, isn't there? And in the black yin, there's a white dot. Now what does that mean? That what? The white dot is going to what? Morph into the black and be full, and what? And the black is going to morph into the white. In other words, those two principles, those dualistic principles, are constantly interacting with each other. Understand? That one thing defines another. So what is life without that? And I don't want life to be that way, do I? I want it all to just be good. I just want to be warm and fuzzy and loving and everything good all the time. So some sages have said, you want to be bored for good. That's what you want. Huh? You'll start whining and complaining. If everything is perfect here, you will start whining right away. And anyway, there'll be no reason for it, will there? Because everything's already perfect as you are. So why try to project? You're already perfect as you are. So why would you try to project that onto something that could never become perfect? You only do it because you don't understand the nature of reality. And so the teaching just, explains how it works. This is a beautiful, very important chapter, this chapter 7 in the Gita. And if you don't want to read the whole thing, I've got videos on it and all that. And the video here on I've got really good, I did every verse in the Gita. So, and we have the video and the audio of that now. So if you want the inner thing where I've unfolded every single verse, the inner meaning totally of every single verse, get that new audio or video. If you like audio, it's there. If you like video, it's there. And it'll explain to you in detail how this works. All of it. It's really amazing.